Good morning.
Good morning.
Our first two witnesses this morning together both members of the same family wish to be known as P and Bronny.
That's correct, sir.
So P and Bronny, please.
Please state your full name
Penelope Ray.
and repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely,
I do solemnly, sincerely,
and truly declare and affirm
and truly declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Please state your full name
Bronwyn, Bourn.
and repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely,
I do solemnly, sincerely,
and truly declare and affirm
and truly declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Now, P, you're probably going to have to come a little bit closer to the microphone. I'm not quite sure what's happened with the sound this morning, because I think I sound very loud, and you don't. And it's more important people should hear from you than from me.
P and Bronny, you are here to tell us about Paul, your husband P, and your dad Bronny. P, can you start by telling us how Paul came to be infected with hepatitis C?
Paul was infected after a motorbike accident. He had some treatment back in the 80s and had a blood transfusion.
He had a motorcycle accident on the 31st of August, 1981, and it was really very serious.
It was.
Can you tell us a little bit more of what happened?
Well, I wasn't there, but
what you understood had happened?
he had a motorbike crash, had a head injury and a leg injury, and the leg was completely mashed. They tried to save it. He had some treatments, had external fixations for a while, and then it had to be amputated.
And from the records, you've established that Paul received a transfusion of 6 units of blood on the 22nd of January 1982.
Yeah.
You met Paul in 1985.
I did.
And we've got a photo that you'd like to be shown during your evidence.
Well, just say that he's not just a number, you know.
Absolutely. Here it is. Roughly when was that photograph taken?
1980...
No.
No, 1990. How old's Bronny? She was born in 92, so 94, maybe? Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit of what Paul was like?
Well, that just picture sort of sums him up. But as he was then, he was chirpy, happy, fit, amusing. He'd left school early and then gone back and did a load of education, became a social worker, and he was just game for anything back then, yeah.
Despite the amputation, you've described that he did lots of swimming,
Yeah, it's really
walking,
annoying. Yeah.
camping.
Yeah. Did the whole shebang, and I was a very fit swimmer, and he could beat me, which I thought was a little frustrating because he only had one leg. But he was very game for anything. So the prosthesis didn't really apart from when it, was bleeding or whatever. But most of the time he was, absolutely game for anything. Tootled around France, camping, everything. So he was a happy sort of chap.
Bronny, you were 6 when your dad was diagnosed with hepatitis C, but what are your memories of your dad before that?
A little bit sketchy. I remember him being a very strong, tall, funny, caring, loving man.
You've described a trip to Legoland in your statement.
I think that's probably one of my earlier memories of him taking me to Legoland, and at that point he was able to walk around with me for most of the way, which obviously changed later on.
Paul had smoked for a number of years and developed some lung problems.
Emphysema, yeah.
P, can you tell us what they were?
He had emphysema. As soon as he was diagnosed, he gave up smoking, but it progressed, and hence the referral to, because he was really young, to Papworth for potential lung transplant.
That happened in October 1997, and he attended an initial assessment.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit of what happened down at Papworth?
Oh, it's strange, isn't it? It's, you go down for, I can't remember how long, 2 or 3 days. They go through various tests to see, one, whether he needed the lung transplant, whether it was advanced enough, and 2, whether he's healthy enough in other ways to take it. A weird few days.
You then understood that there would be a follow-up assessment
Absolutely.
that would be scheduled.
Yeah.
And you chased in early 1999 to see what had happened. What were you told on the phone?
I can't remember the whole conversation, obviously, but we were asked if he'd had the treatment. We didn't know what on earth they were talking about, to be quite honest. Anyway, it turns out that they meant the treatment for his, to clear the HCV, because he had to clear that before getting the lung transplant, but we didn't know anything about it.
And Papworth said, well, we sent a letter to the GP.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could we have document 1962005, please? This is the letter from Papworth to Paul, and if we go down to the body of the letter, and we can see, as per our telephone conversation, I enclose copy of the correspondence dated the 4th of November 1997, sent to your GP following your assessment. And if we go to the next page, here is the letter from Papworth to the GP, indicating his virology screen has now revealed that he's positive for hepatitis C antibody. I'd be grateful if you could bring this positive result to Paul's attention along with the necessary counselling.
Yeah.
Can we then have document 1962006?
Oh gosh, that's tiny.
It will come up, don't worry. This is a letter from the GP to the Royal South Hampshire Hospital. If we just go up slightly, Paul, so we can see the date of it. 2nd November 1998. And we can see there that the GP is asking the Royal South Hampshire Hospital. A year ago, I had a letter from Papworth that was copied to you saying Paul's virology screen had been positive for hepatitis C antibody. They ask that I bring this to Paul's attention along with the necessary counselling. The reality has been that Paul hasn't returned to my surgery until now. He had a good deal to tell me, and I was pleased to find him in a fairly positive frame of mind. I therefore did not have the heart to add to his worries when I hadn't seen him for so long. I'm also uncertain as to what the current wisdom is in counselling patients with hepatitis C. Can I therefore pass the buck? Paul is due to see you in early January. That would be January 1999.
Yeah.
We clearly have to inform him of this finding, and I will tackle it next time if you feel unable to raise the matter in January. I'm sorry to pass this on. I normally see him several times a year, in which circumstances it would have been easier to raise.
Oh, what a load of rubbish.
If we then look at 1962008, which is the reply from the Royal Hospital to the GP, I didn't know we had to counsel people with hepatitis C, and I'm going to try and find out about this from the microbiologists. I shall try to have some definite information about it by the time I see Paul in January. And then 1962007, November 1998, from the Royal to the Southampton General Hospital to the Virology Department. I wonder if you can advise me about counselling and hepatitis C. This patient has very severe emphysema and may be going for lung transplantation in the foreseeable future. We've been asked to counsel him about hepatitis C, but he's an extremely anxious man and I don't want to raise yet more fears in his mind. I'd be grateful for your comments. Throughout this correspondence, you and Paul were completely unaware
Ignorant.
that he had hepatitis C.
Yeah.
As you said, in early 1999, you chased the result of the lung assessment, and at that point you were told about the hepatitis C.
Yeah.
You then phoned the GP straight away.
I'm afraid so. Yeah.
And what did you say? What did they say?
To be quite honest, again, I can't remember exactly. We were both really shocked and extremely, well, at that point, probably not extremely angry because we didn't know all the connotations of what Hep C involved, really. Knew a little bit, but not enough. And they organised for Paul and I to go down and talk to the GP and the GP practice manager, or I don't know, somebody like that. I think it was done in such a way that it seemed official, and they tried to defend the fact that they hadn't told him, basically. Which I think is quite incredible. He was a family GP. It wasn't that he was just Paul. I don't mean just Paul's, but you know, he was the family GP, and he was putting Paul at risk. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And he was supposed to be looking after Bronwyn and I as well. So basically, he didn't look after any of us. You know.
You've said in your statement that the GP said he'd received the letter, but hadn't told Paul about his diagnosis because he didn't think Paul was emotionally ready to hear about it.
I mean, yes, Paul, by that point, had become more anxious and more... He was a very feisty chap in a good way, but the feistiness then became a little bit more feisty. And, yeah, of course he was anxious, and at that point he was extremely anxious because, you know, what the heck, I've just got Hep C and my, you know, what's going to happen? And this could put a stop to the lung transplant, which would, you know, help his quality of life. And yeah, it was just frustrating and difficult. And whatever his anxiety, surely knowing what's happening and to medically support him in that and stop putting other people at risk. Because he was the sort of chap, he had one leg. Often when you have a new leg put on, it bleeds, it's this and that, you have to do all of that. So we were doing all of that, naturally, and he was doing all of that, and the people fitting his leg were doing all of that. And we did it at home regularly. He did woodwork, was bashing himself all the time, and, you know, woodwork for fun. And we were all put at risk. And Paul, I mean, in a way where, you know, we didn't contract anything, and that's incredible. But if we had, imagine what Paul would have felt. It just seemed really, really unethical and unfair and not dangerous, that's the wrong word, but yeah, difficult. I'm amazed that they thought that he couldn't have coped. He's a feisty man. I mean, you know, it wasn't that you know, it's what I think it was an excuse not to talk to him. You know, he was an intelligent man. There's nothing that he couldn't have... It would have been better for him to have known from then rather than to find out like we did and then have all of the stuff that happened, so...
I'm not really sure how you can prejudge who will or won't react badly to being told that they have a lifelong illness.
Yeah.
So...
I should say the GP has been invited to respond to the documents and to your statements, and his response will be published when it becomes available.
May I just ask something? You were asked about whether he was emotionally ready to hear the information, your response was, I think, telling us what he was like after he'd had the information. If you'd been in the shoes of the GP,
Yeah.
not knowing, or sort of knowing that he had hepatitis C, but looking at a man who was facing the particular challenges of this lung condition, as he was, would you have thought he was extremely anxious?
No. No, I mean, he was feisty. I'm not saying that he was...
Well, feisty is not necessarily anxious.
But he wasn't anxious or, not at all.
Yep.
Paul was then referred to the hepatologist.
Mm-hmm.
Can we have document 19620010, please? And it's the second page. And it's the last couple of paragraphs. We can see in the, my fault, Paul, the paragraph above that. During routine testing for possible lung transplantation, it was discovered he is hepatitis C positive. And then if we go to the next paragraph, I've not told Mr. Bourn that his tests have also shown evidence of previous hepatitis B. I didn't want to question him closely on his sexual and possible IV drug habits, although I think you may have to do this. As far as I know, he's never had a blood transfusion, but again, I haven't asked directly.
Or checked in the records. It's quite
But he also has one leg.
Exactly.
So, it had to have gone somehow.
In fact, it was later established that Paul had not had hepatitis B, and this was entirely incorrect about hepatitis B.
It was.
And if we go to the last paragraph, I would be most grateful if you would see him. He's a rather introverted, anxious and questioning man who will require quite a bit of your time. I'm sure you'll be able to put his mind at rest on the hepatitis question much better than me, and you may feel he deserves treatment at this stage.
Well, sorry, you didn't ask.
I was about to say, what's your response?
Sorry. I don't see how he can be seen 1 minute as anxious and out there, and the next one as introverted. He certainly was questioning. He would question everything, everything in life. And that was the way he was. It is not something that... It seems that the insinuation seems to be quite patronising like that. And the way it says whether you feel he deserves treatment, I mean, that's the wrong wording, isn't it? Whether he can have treatment, whether he's medically whatever, but not deserves it. Bit of a P. I wouldn't say introverted either. Certainly not. Who was that from, sorry?
This was from the consultant physician across to the...
consultant physician at...
It was the Southampton, I think it was the Royal Hospital.
Oh,
consultant at the Royal, who then referred him across to the hepatologist.
Yeah.
So this was the referral that got him to see the hepatologist.
Yeah.
And when you saw them, what did he tell you?
If I remember rightly, that was a chappie called... I can't remember. I'm not allowed to say his name. Oh, whoops. Sorry. He was super straight down to earth. It was the first time we spoke to anybody who just sat down and spoke to you as if you were human beings, So he said, basically, this is what you've got. These are the treatments available. We need to see if Paul can take the treatment. But you need to get rid of it in order to have your lung transplant. So he was just totally practical and sensible. Super.
What advice did you receive from the doctors about the risks of Paul infecting you and infecting Bronnie?
Nothing, really. I asked, because I was a little uneasy, that maybe we had contracted it somehow. And so it's going to sound really embarrassing now, because he only said one thing, and it was just really embarrassing to say it out loud. But it just said, the only way you'll ever get it is if you are intimate during your period. And that was what I was told. And that was the end of the counselling.
When Paul told his immediate family about his infection,
Yeah.
What was
that didn't
their
go down well.
reaction?
I think they were scared, actually. I think the only... It's difficult because they're really... a really nice family, and he saw them reasonably regularly, but they were very shocked and I think scared, and their initial response was, oh my God, we're all going to get AIDS, get out, sort of thing. So it wasn't very nice.
Would you prefer me to read what you've said in your statement?
Oh, probably best.
Trying to explain it to his family was really hard for him due to the stigma around HCV. Paul was different to the rest of the family. They were less educated and informed about life in
And I
general.
don't mean that rudely, you know, it's just their... Yeah. Sorry, shut up, P.
No. His mum, you've said in the statement, reacted very badly and he was very shocked and scared by her reaction.
Yeah.
And the big fear, I'm slightly paraphrasing, but the big fear from his family was that this was somehow connected to AIDS.
Yeah.
And that they would contract it.
Yeah. And I think the only information that they seemed to go back to were those funny, well, not funny, those horrendous advertisements on the TV in the 80s. So they just thought having Paul in the house was just going to kill them all off, so it was out.
How much contact did you have with them?
For a while, not really. I think Paul was really upset, obviously. You know, it turned around, but it was a while.
There was an early discussion about whether Paul should have treatment for the hepatitis C.
Yeah.
And if we look at 19620012 and the last paragraph of that letter, it's a letter to the GP setting out some of the things that had been discussed. It's right, isn't it, that you were told the optimal treatment was alpha interferon and ribavirin.
Mm-hmm.
But the difficulty with that, we can see that at the bottom of the letter, other complications of treatment were discussed. It's my understanding that Mr. Bourn has severe emphysema and he's unlikely to tolerate a significant deterioration in his chest disease. The symptomatic breathlessness and the pulmonary infiltrates associated with interferon are both reversible on cessation of the treatment. Thus, if his chest doctor considers it to be safe for Mr. Bourn, we could attempt a trial of interferon and monitor his symptoms.
Yeah, but without it, he couldn't get the blood well, I mean, it didn't work anyway, but, you know, at that point, it was just frustrating because without it, he couldn't go forward and have the transplant, you know.
At that stage, it was decided he shouldn't have the hepatitis C treatment.
Yep.
You've said you feel Paul wasn't given enough information
No.
to make a proper decision.
No.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, we weren't given any, so I think that probably sums it up. Well, no, that's not quite true. We were told that it was interferon and ribavirin, and either he would be eligible for it medically or he wouldn't be, and that was the information we were given. So I don't think that's very much information.
He had treatment in 2006, which
Yep.
we will come to, but until 2006, can you tell us a little bit about what Paul's physical condition was like?
Lung-wise, it wasn't till 2001 that he had a secondary respiratory failure. So up until that point, yes, he was breathless, but it wasn't anything really drastic. He wasn't on continuous oxygen or anything like that. But what did seem to happen was that his ability to... He got more and more... I can only describe it as fuzzy-headed, and that was before the treatment. He lost his job. He was low, he was depressed, every little medical thing became something, as if he couldn't fight anything off. At the time, we didn't realise that that was potentially something that with hepatitis things are more difficult to, you know, but we had not really got an idea of that. He was going downhill. I mean, I don't know how else to say it, really, mentally and physically. But it didn't seem to be related. I mean, his lungs were one thing, and you could see that deteriorate, not dramatically, but it did. But the rest of him, it just wasn't right. You know, he struggled.
You've said he caught every bug going,
Everything.
and it became a big deal each time.
In and out of that bloody hospital. So one little chest infection, which I know with emphasis, thank you, Danny, with emphysema, you know, you're going to get little chest infections and things, and that's just quite common. But for him, it would become a big deal. Or if he had caught a tummy bug, anything, it would mean ending up in hospital, and you couldn't kind of work out why. But everything was a bit of a pain, really. And his memory didn't seem to be quite as right as it should be. But yeah, so that was about it, really.
You said his personality also changed.
It changed over the years, and I can't put a thingy on. That's what I mean. He just seemed kind of fuzzy and became more. So the parts of him, and I don't know, looking back, I know it was a lot more after or during and after the treatment, but up until that point, there were things beginning to be noticeable, like his memory loss, not quite being able to work things through in the same intelligent, normal way that he did, you know?
And how did that impact you and your marriage?
Oh, it's poo. Yeah, you become a carer, don't you, rather than a wife. And you know, he's yeah. Well, that's yeah. It changes it, doesn't it? It just does. It made it difficult, and it must have been far more difficult for Bronwyn because I couldn't explain, especially with when we get to the treatment bit. You know, you just have to say it's because he's ill, and that's not an easy thing when he's being difficult.
Bronnie, you were 6 when your dad was diagnosed and 13 when he started the treatment in 2006. But in that in-between stage, how did your dad's illness affect you?
My recollection of exactly what happened in which year is not very clear. I think I've done a fairly good job of blocking it out. It was incredibly difficult. His reasoning completely went out the window. He had moments where his memory would go and I would return home from school and he would have no idea who I was. And he could become very violent and aggressive through no fault of his own, but I didn't understand why he was doing those things. It was really hard.
You've described that over time, that feistiness became aggression and
Yeah.
volatility.
Yeah. Yeah. That was post-treatment, really, or during treatment and post-treatment. Yeah.
Paul had to retire from work in 2003
Yeah.
in his early 50s. What brought that about?
I think it was the early parts of his not being able to organise himself in the same way of his logical thinking and his memory and all of that sort of thing. He wasn't able to. He was a social work care manager, and he just couldn't do it. But he'd fought so hard to get that job and to educate himself to get it. It was hard for him.
He was actually quite senior in the social services structure, conducting assessments of patients eligible for disability.
Yeah, and he'd been
benefits.
in children and families, and they kind of swap around, didn't they? But yeah, yes, that was a bit ironic, but hey.
His confusion was getting worse, and his short-term memory was getting worse.
Yeah, not major, but it was enough to find it very difficult to hold a job like that. Yeah.
And what was Paul's reaction to him losing that job?
He got very low, really, I suppose. Angry and with the situation, and thinking, well, if I have my lung transplant, that'll make all the difference. If I can get treated for the Hep C, that'll make all the difference, and I can go back and do it, you know. So he was cross, but understood, so he got very low, yeah.
You and he understood why he couldn't carry on working.
Yeah.
But emotionally, it was a huge,
it's a
huge
big
blow.
deal, yeah.
By 2006, his emphysema had advanced considerably.
Yep.
And he needed to have a lung transplant.
He did.
What was he told then about the hepatitis C?
Again, that it would have to be treated in order to have it, otherwise you'd have to go on a ventilator, blah, blah, blah. So we were told that, yep, he needed treatment, and the chap who was dealing with the possibility of treatment said that they would start the interferon and ribavirin, but I don't understand how they could start it then. And I know now it doesn't make any difference because it didn't work anyway, but you don't know that at the time. So if they could start it in 2006, why couldn't they have started it earlier when his lung condition wasn't nearly as bad? I mean, but anyway, so sorry,
Please stop apologising. It's important evidence. Your concern is that if he had to have it in 2006
Yeah.
to have the transplant,
he needed it in whenever it was,
you should have started.
90, whatever it was, to have the transplant.
Paul ultimately had 2 courses of treatment,
Yeah, that was stinky.
neither of which was successful.
No.
Can you tell us something of the side effects and the impact on him?
Yeah, we were told, to be fair, that it might the treatment might give slight mood swings, might make you feel a bit low, might make you nothing. You know, that was sort of it. It might affect your mood a bit, is what we were told. So you think, well, that's okay. And he goes through the treatment. He was put on antidepressants after a while. I can't remember exactly when. It was foul, and how they can give you that treatment without telling you and telling the people who are looking after you what it entails. It's hard. He became, sorry, sweets. He became very depressed, very angry, very illogical, and yeah, you never knew what you were going to walk into, basically. And he shut himself in the kitchen and became this person who watched food programmes, which is just really bizarre for him, and got fixated on these things. And then if he came in, he would just, yeah. He became very difficult. And he didn't know how to, you know it's a treatment in the end, but you think all of this can't be, they just said you'd feel a bit low, and this whole thing explodes in your face, really. But he's got to go through it. You've got to finish the treatment because otherwise you can't have the transplant. But yeah, it was pretty stinky.
Bronnie, during this time you were bullied at school. What was going on?
I don't know. I have to ask them. It was really not particularly fun. Other people knew that my dad was sick. They'd seen him in his mobility scooter and with his oxygen cylinders. And I think my personality started to change. But they definitely clung on to the fact that he was ill and I was different, and that was a reason to bully me for that. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind reading.
Of course. The children at school knew I was different and I was having problems at home and targeted me because of this. They bullied me physically as well as emotionally. Once at the playground at school, some girls came and threw stones at me and tore my dress off. As a result of this bullying, I often tried to hurt myself so I could go to the infirmary and be taken home from school. I used to repeatedly hit my wrist on the banisters at school to try to fracture my bone so I could leave. I spent a lot of time in my room at home. You then started to have panic attacks at school. and started to take paracetamol obsessively. Would you
Yes,
like me?
unfortunately I did, yes.
Would you like me to just read some
If
of
you
your
wouldn't
statements?
mind, yeah.
I ended up overdosing on it. I believe I did this as a call for help, to have some control over part of my life where most of it seemed to be completely out of my control. I was taken to hospital and stayed there for around a week. I remember that the mental health services came to visit me in hospital and they told my mother I was completely fine. At this point, I was on the cusp of needing a liver transplant, and they discussed transferring me to Great Ormond Street Hospital. I can't imagine what this would have done to my mother. My mother had to give up work to look after me. When I was around 15, I ran away from home, and after this, my mother told my father he had to move out and live in sheltered accommodation. P, can you tell us a little bit about that time in relation to particularly the sheltered accommodation?
Yeah. Well, I didn't say I had to get sheltered accommodation. I did say, no, you've got, we had social services, we had camps, I had a whole bloody lot
That's just
going.
where he ended up.
It is where he went. So he was trying to move in with his family. So with his mother was still alive, and he has six other brothers and sisters. So it was to move in with his sister or his mummy, one of the sisters he was really close to. The mother refused to have him in the house. And his sister, one of his sisters, did have him for a couple of weeks till he could find something, but it was 2 weeks. Luckily, there was a place in Lymington, which is about 20 minutes away from us, which was some sheltered accommodation that he got. So I helped him move in there, and that way my logic was, it probably wasn't right, I have no idea at that point, but my logic was then Bronnie could be safe at home and I could look after Paul by going down there, talk to him a zillion times a day, but going down there and looking after him there. And then when Bronnie was at boarding school, then he would come back for weekends and we'd do the visitation. And that, we did it like that to say there was trying to get some stability, which was really difficult for Bron, and it was really difficult for Paul. But he did sort of, after the initial going through it, he did come to terms with the fact that that had to be the way it was for a period of time till we were assuming, or I was assuming, that his calmness and everything else would at some point come back and he would be able to be him again, up, mentally. And so that was the logic. So just while he was doing this, I thought it was safest to do that. And so I looked after him, and Bronnie saw him down there rather than him being in the house.
You've described that he rang you every day, up to 5 times a day, wanting to be in touch.
Yeah, I have. The thing is that makes it so difficult is that he didn't understand why any of this was happening. And I wanted to add that the reason that I was having those problems is because of the difficulties we were having at home. It wasn't just a random thing that I decided to do. I didn't really decide to do it, but I think mental health is something that people don't talk about, and it needs to be spoken about more, and that actually things that happen in your life can affect you in a number of different ways. But yeah, he was not very well, and mentally he was not very well, and he had tried overdosing on his antidepressants, and he had become quite violent at home, and
with the paramedics.
He would assault medical physicians that would try and come and help him, and just every day was really hard, and I can't verbalise actually what that was like. But yeah, unfortunately he didn't really understand, but he wrote me lots of letters apologising, but saying, please tell me what I've done wrong, I don't understand. But actually that did work eventually, and my relationship with him grew, and it was really beautiful.
Yeah.
And then he went.
After your overdose, you had problems with your school, Bronnie.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, so I was just about to sit my GCSEs, and my school decided that I wasn't allowed back to finish anything, and they said that I was too much of a insurance risk on the school grounds. I was a very driven person, and academics to me meant a lot. And I had been predicted very good grades, and to have got that far, and then just been told, no, you're not allowed to come back, that's it, you've blown it. It was really hard because I didn't feel like I had done anything wrong, and I posed no risk to anyone else. We asked if they would let me in with Mummy to come and supervise, I suppose, particularly for sort of science, practical stuff like that. And they were really not happy about it. We had to attend a number of meetings there. Eventually, they let me go and sit my exams, but I wasn't allowed to complete
The courses.
the actual taught lessons.
After your GCSEs, what did you do in terms of education?
So I went to a school near Bath. It was a boarding school, and absolutely loved it there. It was amazing, and very
really helped, didn't it?
grateful for that. But I did my A levels, and that was all good. And then I went to Exeter University.
Which we'll come to in a minute. P, the treatment that Paul had was unsuccessful.
Yes.
How did Paul react when he was told that?
Don't think you want a blow-by-blow account, but pretty much that, really. He was... Yeah, I mean, it's you go through all of that. And mentally he hadn't come out the other side after, because there's that 6 months wait to check if the virus had gone. So he was still having the effects of the treatment. He was cross and angry and determined that he would get the transplant. And anyway, so he had another load of treatment. Basically, it wasn't a good reaction. It was very depressing and difficult.
But the second round of treatment also failed.
It did.
And you've described that he was infuriated about it.
That's, yeah, putting it very politely. Yeah, he was absolutely infuriated.
You later found out about Harvoni. Was Paul
Yes.
ever offered it?
No.
And how do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, I don't know whether it would have helped or not helped, but from what I've read, it can also be really helpful for people in last stage liver disease from Hep C, and he was never offered it. He was never told about it. I mean, poor chap, that time he was in hospital from May till he died, well, went to Oakhaven and then died, but in those few weeks, I was there for every dotting ward round. I didn't leave because they weren't very good at looking after him, so, and I know he was difficult, I'm not pretending he wasn't, but he was. But he also had false teeth because he had to have his teeth out because of the potential transplant. They couldn't put him under for getting the teeth out because of the emphysema, so he had to have them out individually awake, and it was like absolute torture for him. But they didn't take the false teeth out, they didn't take the false leg off.
They didn't turn his oxygen on.
They didn't turn his oxygen on, so they give him a ventilator every night, and they'd forget to turn the oxygen on at the wall. So I was there from breakfast till he went to sleep in the evening, so that those things could be done. So I didn't miss anything. I'm sure it peeves them horrendously, but what else can you do? Yeah. Sorry, I can't remember the original question.
Let's just track back. Let's just track back slightly. January 2010, he had a liver biopsy and was diagnosed with grade 1 fibrosis.
Yep.
January 2013, he was diagnosed with cirrhosis
Yep.
of the liver.
I thought, well, I don't know because I'm not a liver person or a medic of any sort, but he and I were just, in a way, when we thought that he would have probably got as far as cirrhosis earlier than he did, but it was never classified as cirrhosis, or it never was, I don't know. But when it was classified as cirrhosis, and I'm sorry because it's a financial thing, but they said, right, then you're able to get the next thing on the Skipton doodah or whatever it is, next payment. And then you will also have some way of living. They give you like an amount per month. So we thought, well, at least for the next few years, then he will have, something to live on each month, and it'll just make life a little bit easier for him. And he was arranging that we all went on. He wanted a cruise, which I wasn't keen on. Or went on holidays with his monthly income. But anyway, he got classified cirrhosis or diagnosed in January. By April, he had ascites, and so he had that drained. And we were told then that would be happening probably a couple of times a year from now on, because that's just the way it is.
From your perspective, in the April, he was relatively stable.
Well, we thought so. We weren't told otherwise. Yeah, but we were told that ascites would happen, and once he'd had it, we were told then it would just carry on happening now and again, and he would probably have to have the draining on a reasonably regular basis.
But on the 12th of May 2013, he went back to hospital because he was vomiting blood.
Yep.
And at that point, you were told things were not good at all.
Oh, I wasn't told it wasn't good at all. I was told this is another part of it. If I had any idea at that point that was the end, I don't know. Anyway, you can't look back, can you, on it and think if only. But at that point, I thought, right, this shouldn't have happened, but it is part of the same thing. There's bleeding, he will need a stent. And I thought, right, okay, fine, he'll need a stent. Not that's okay, but, it's not life-threatening in any way. Nobody said it was life-threatening. Knew it wasn't good, and until they got the stent in, there was that kind of wobble few days, and got poor Bronnie up from her exams. And then we just thought that was tickety-boo, and we were trying to arrange. He wanted to go to Oakhaven, which is the hospice that he did voluntary work in, because they did a 2-week rehab when people come out of hospital before they go home. So we were arranging that, thinking that was what was happening, and it was just a hiccup on the line, along the way. So.
And the plan was to go to the hospice just for 2 weeks. It wasn't a permanent stay. It was a 2-week rehabilitation program.
Yeah, 2-week rehab.
And then
spoken to them and everything.
One day you went into the hospital to see him, and you knew something was wrong.
Well, something was very wrong.
Can you tell us about it?
He the day before he'd been normal Paul at that point. So they were still doing physio. They had the dietitian down, say they were checking what he could eat and all the rest of it, so that he could go for this. I thought so he could keep going with this rehab situation. But I went in that morning about 7:30 as usual, and he wasn't sure who I was, and then this doctor, not the normal ward round doctor, not his consultant or anything, this doctor who I'd never seen before, came and I'm saying something's wrong, and I know that right at last stage that this can happen, but I was thinking that that can't be it, because we're off out where we've got rehab in a minute, and he just said, that's it, he's nothing we can do, we'll put him on the pathway. And I just stood there and I hadn't a clue what they were talking about, and then he walked off, and that's how I was told he was dying. Just that was it. So I'm just standing there at the end of a bloody bed in a ward with the doctor saying, it's right, we'll put him on pathway. And the chap walked away.
And you didn't even understand what the pathway was?
No, it's pathetic, isn't it? But no, I'm a bit naive.
your understanding now is that that was an end-of-life pathway.
Yeah, I know, totally.
palliative
But how
care.
do you know that when somebody just walks up and just says that and walks away?
You've,
No talking to me, no nothing. Just quite amazing. Sorry.
you phoned Bronnie,
I did.
and Bronnie, you came home from university straight away. You stayed with him all night, and you made sure there was sufficient pain relief for
Well, there
him.
was to start with. Yeah.
No, the last word he said
Yeah.
was, "It hurts, help me."
Yeah.
That was the last sentence he said, ever. So
Yeah.
that was awful,
Yeah.
actually.
And there wasn't a doctor on the ward to sign off some more morphine. So to go from he's coming out to he's dying and there's no meds is a bit of a leap. So to go charging around the hospital to find a bloody doctor because there wasn't enough staff and nobody could get hold of anybody to get some more morphine. It was a bit of a ludicrous night, really.
Paul survived the night.
He survived the night, much to everybody's surprise. So I thought the only thing he ever wanted was... he worked at Oakhaven Hospice doing an education programme for schools for 3 or 4 years. And I know that's always where he... so we thought, right, we'll get him to Oakhaven. And the palliative care team at Southampton General were super. They were so lovely. Well, one really organised, lovely lady. The rest of the staff on that ward, horrendous. Didn't give a toss. But this lady was brilliant. Said, yes, we'll get him to Oakhaven, we'll organise an ambulance. Then his consultant, whose name has gone out of my head, but I realise now I'm not allowed to say it anyway, came and said, no, don't take him to Oakhaven, he'll be dead in half an hour. So, luckily my sister and her husband were there too, who helped me say, oh, sod you, we're going to try. The ward was a difficult ward. It had 2 people who had, through no fault of again, but they had quite majorly aggressive dementia, so they were coming around and pulling things and hitting him, and it was just the most ridiculous situation. Anyway, so we got the ambulance. Bronwyn and I went in the ambulance. It had a flat tyre, which was just par for the course on that day. And anyway, we persuaded them they still took us. And he lasted another few days at his very strong old Oxford Paul. Lasted another few days at Oakhaven, but at least he was there and out of that ward and that situation, and we could be there. And so we stayed with him, and our poor chap didn't get a break from us at all during those few days, did he? We just stayed there with him for the whole time.
And Paul died on the 5th of June,
Yeah.
2013.
Exactly. Anniversary yesterday. Great timing.
Bronnie, in the last few years of your dad's life, you've said your relationship with him improved. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, it was brilliant. I finally felt like I was understanding who he was as a man, and our friendship grew, and it was really lovely. It was like putting a plaster on all of the things that had come before to try and help you forget. I only got 2 or 3 years with him. Like that. Sorry.
You said my relationship with my father certainly improved over the last few years, and it was wonderful. We became really good friends, and I loved spending time with him.
Yeah, yeah, I did.
After his death, you had some further mental health difficulties. Do you want to tell us, or would you rather I read your statement?
No, if you wouldn't mind.
Of course. Around 6 months after my father died, I started to become severely anxious and experienced very extreme moments of what's probably best described as existential crisis. My mind would think of what death was and how someone could become nothingness, and then I'd just get this overwhelming feeling of blackness, and it would make me very scared. I'd also see bits of flesh falling off my hands when I looked at them, I was completely unable to go about my normal daily life. I've since managed to bring that under control, but I still really struggle with the feeling of darkness and nothingness, and the idea of death is extremely difficult. I now recognise these as potential symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. You feel it's also had a significant impact on your education and your career.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what's happened?
I studied law at university and took a module in medical law. I became very, very interested in it and did my dissertation on the global organ deficit, particularly because of everything when he was looking at having a lung transplant. I then took a master's in medical law and medical ethics, and I've now decided to pursue a career in law as a medical negligence solicitor.
But you've had some difficulties because of your exam results.
Yep.
In Exeter, because you went to be with your dad as he was dying.
Yeah.
Your second year results weren't
No.
as good as they might have been.
No.
And unfortunately, that's had an ongoing impact in terms of your solicitor training and obtaining the training contract to become a solicitor.
Yeah. So my uncle was waiting for me at the back of my second year law exam to go take me to my dad, unbeknown to me. I did continue up to I finished my degree, but I didn't do as well as I was meant to have done. And my mitigating circumstances weren't taken into account by Exeter. They said, well, you're meant to tell us within 5 days of the event happening. And I said, well, I was at his funeral. It wasn't my first priority. And it meant that I had to show, when I went to do my master's, I had to have a letter from Exeter to confirm that they didn't take it into account. I had to have extra letters from my supervising lecturers saying that I was capable of doing it and that event happened, and I had to provide his death certificate. But it also meant that when I've been applying for training contracts with law firms, they claim that even if you didn't get a 2-1 and you have mitigating circumstances, that they take that into account, but don't believe that's necessarily true. And I had to fight really hard to get one, and it made it really difficult.
P, in terms of the effect on your financial situation, in 2003, you were advised that Paul wouldn't be eligible for any financial assistance because the transfusion was in 1983, but Paul was advised to talk to the Citizens Advice Bureau.
Mm-hmm.
But you didn't really manage to find out about the Skipton Fund until about 2004.
Well, we didn't know. I mean, that probably sounds really silly as well, but we just didn't know. We weren't given any of. We didn't even know about the Hep C. The Hep C Trust. We didn't know that these things, that Skipton and the other one,
Caxton,
existed. So it's just hard, and maybe that's. It's fine for me to go off and do my research on the illness and this, that, and the other, but I don't. Anyway, sorry, we didn't know particularly, but we did in the end, and he got the, initial payment, and they gave a little help towards what they thought would be Paul's contribution to Bronnie's rent for 1 year down at uni. And then when he got diagnosed with cirrhosis, he got the second payment, but unfortunately he only got 1 month or 2 months of the actual normal ongoing payments because he died. So I don't know if most people who have Hep C die within a nanosecond of being diagnosed with cirrhosis. That just seemed a little bit unfair to him. For me, it's obviously affected, not obviously necessary, but it has affected my work. But in a way, that was my choice because I wanted to support Paul at every appointments and everything, but partly because he would get confused, and then he would get angry when he came home and say, well, I don't know what they said and I didn't understand. So you make the effort to try and go to everything. So that obviously affected my work, and when he had stays in hospital, I would do that. When Bronnie had her hiccup, then I did that. So yes, my career was put on hold, I suppose. And now I'm pretty antique. It's a bit hard cheddar. But it has also meant that I couldn't be on contract because I needed so much time to do the stuff to support things. So I now have no pension. I think it's 5,200, so it's not amazing when you've worked all your life apart from these bits, but because I couldn't have the contract. And also, I know this is, I don't even know I'm allowed to say it here really, but that EIB whatever...
EIBSS.
Thank you. That thing says that when your income gets... So when I do have to retire, which is in a nanosecond, that they will do bereavement payments if your income is below whatever, 10,000 or something, which mine will be. But then it says household income, not my income. So if I'm living with somebody else, why would EIB Hoodlepiff not... Why would the government then stop paying the bereavement payments if that's due because of what happened with Paul, that they then think, well, some other chap can take it on who's nothing to do with anything. Do you know what I mean? It just doesn't seem, if it's an individual payment or a household payment, and I know it has to be done on income, but that's me and mine. Why should I then have to rely on anybody else? Anyway, sorry.
No,
little rant.
It's very relevant. You also, in your statement, wanted to raise something else about the process of receiving financial assistance.
Yeah, well, I didn't, because you're, and it sounds like I'm a really bossy cow, and maybe I am, but it was hard for Paul to go through all of that process and do all the paperwork and do everything that goes with it. So then you're trying to do it, and it felt, for him, he would sit there and just say, it feels like we're begging and having to prove things, and I just felt really wrong.
You've said
if it's diagnosed and it is, and they know why, then it should just happen, you know? You shouldn't be there having to prove and beg, and he felt very much that he was asking for things and having to prove things rather than this has happened, therefore this happens, you know?
You put it rather more forcefully in your witness statement.
Yeah, I probably did.
In my mind, they screwed his life up.
Yeah, well, they think they did, really.
And compensation for this should be provided automatically.
Yeah, I think that's pretty P language, yeah. Well, they did. They screwed him up, but they weren't forthcoming in sorting things. Not that they can sort it out because he's not here, but you know what I mean? They just other things you shouldn't have to be begging for. You know, it should just happen.
Those are the questions I have for you both. Is there anything else you would like to say?
Well, you forgot the piece of paper.
I'll get the piece of paper. We wrote it down.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind.
Of course.
We are, of course, extremely honoured to be representing Paul here today. However, he should, of course, be here to represent himself. It is impossible for us to vocalise the suffering he has experienced, and we know he would have had a lot to say. His absence represents the importance of this inquiry, and we can't help thinking about those who may have no one to represent them. We also ask the inquiry not to overlook the severity of the effects on those left behind, alongside those living with their own experiences and the people continuing to support them. Sometimes the damage isn't always something you can see.
I'm just going to turn and see if Mr. Locke, who, as you know, represents you, if there are any points he would like me to raise. There are just a couple of points he asks me to raise with you. we've obviously heard the impact on both of your mental health, and the impact on you. P, were you ever offered any counselling or psychological support?
No, not once. And actually, considering I went down to about 7 stone and being this big is pretty skinny. But no, wasn't offered anything. Actually, after the initial, the first 2 days back at Church House, we went to that, and I did actually ring them saying, actually, hey, but I never heard anything back. So that was odd. But yeah, no, but generally I haven't been offered anything.
And Bronnie, you obviously had some mental health input, but from
Not
your
much.
father's clinicians, was there any offer of support to you?
No, and the only reason I got some help is because school said, if you don't, we won't take you back, but they didn't take me back anyway, so.
And just 2 points in relation to the treatment that Paul received. Were you ever told about the criteria set by the NHS in the 1990s for Paul securing access to the interferon and the ribavirin treatment?
Criteria for them? No.
Yes.
No. It's just whether he was medically capable of taking it.
And do you know why Harvoni was never offered to Paul?
No.
And if you had known about Harvoni, what would you have done?
I'd have gone and bloody got it. Yeah. Seeing if it would work. Anything was worth a try.
Well, thank you both very much for coming and telling us about Paul and your life with him. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, we'll take a break till 12:20, and then who do we hear from?
We'll be hearing from Michelle Baker.
Thank you. It's 12:20.